Welcome to the House Committee on Health and Human Services and Elderly Affairs. We have several things to consider this morning: retained bills, bills that have been amended, House bills that have been amended by the Senate, and later on this morning we'll be going into executive session. But before we do any of that, I'd like you to please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay. Yesterday morning, I had been looking through all of my emails. We had talked about the retained bills. I sent out a list of the retained bills to all of the committee members. Hopefully everyone received it. And, you know, I had also indicated everybody who has expressed an interest in certain bills to date. I apologize, I didn't have a chance to update this after I sent it out. I received a few emails after. This got sent out yesterday morning. I know Representative Leon had sent me an email. I didn't have a chance to put her information on here, or Representative Nutter Upham's. I think there may have been one or two others. So anyway, basically what I'm hoping to do this morning is go through the various bills. I put down the people who have expressed interest so far in particular bills, working on them. As we know, we have until, I think it's November, anybody know the date, the final date? We haven't, well, deep into the fall anyway, before we have to resolve them. And it's my understanding in July and August we really can't meet. If we do, we aren't going to be sanctioned. They discourage summertime meetings. But we do have a little bit of time in June for some of the more, I'm sorry? 17th. November 17th. I think that's the anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution or something. But anyway, if I remember my history. But you know, some of the simpler bills we might be able to work on in June, but many of these are going to take certainly well into the fall to complete. So anyway, with that, I'll open it for discussion. Any thoughts on, and actually before we get too far, I'd like to update names in terms of who wants to work on what, because again, some of those emails I did not put on here. Representative Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was an email from Representative Nutter Upham. She is interested in 317. If you want to write these down. 368, 378, and then there are three that are not on your list. 580. 619.
Oh, 580 is on the back.
Oh, is it? Yeah. Oh, okay. No wonder I couldn't find it. 580, 619, and 236.
Okay, let me just repeat those back if I may. 317, 368, 378. 580, 619, and 236?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
And if I may just, I've said this to you, but I'll just state it for the committee. I think that there are several sets of bills that could possibly be referred to one particular subcommittee. And the one I'm thinking of in particular are House Bill 264, House Bill 368, and the opposite of 368, which is the bill that for 619, those three, I thought. It particularly because two bills are on the same subject and take an opposite viewpoint, it would be unfortunate if we referred them to two different subcommittees who came to opposite conclusions.
Sure.
It would be helpful if we had at least one set of eyes looking at it for the first part. And if there's division at the end of it, of course, that's perfectly all right. We do that all the time.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Leon, I know you had sent me an email too. Do you want to share your thoughts?
Yes, thank you. I'm interested in participating on the transgender issued ones, which would be 317, 368, and 619.
Okay, I'm sorry, 317,
368
okay,
and 619.
okay.
Also on the developmental disability ones, which are, first one was 317. Sorry, I said that one already. 264, I was on the birth records. I apologize for giving you the wrong number.
Okay, you want to be
there.
on 364?
264.
264, I'm sorry,
Yes.
yeah.
And then also 608 for developmental disabilities.
Okay,
And also on the sexual assault, which is 378.
oh, yes, yes, Representative Copal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had sent an email yesterday looking to be added for 317, 580. And then I also wanted to put my name in for 608. And then I have a strong interest in 406, and I think that's something that we should be talking to the chair of Children and Family Law about. And good
He
news,
actually happens to be here.
he is here today.
I was here for the Alumni Association meeting, but we can talk.
Okay, Representative Copal, if I could just repeat those. 406, you just mentioned, 317, 580, and 608?
Correct.
Okay. Any other names to be added? Representative Murphy?
Thank you. I would like to participate if possible on House Bill 329 and also House Bill 580.
Okay, 329 and 580? Okay, any others?
I had,
Representative King?
I had requested HB 566.
Okay. Representative McLean?
So I think 329 is important and it's looking pretty light, so I'll go up on that one as well.
Okay,
Which one?
Sorry, 329. I'm also interested in 317, but I think you got enough staff on that one.
okay. Anyone else? Any other, Representative Mazur?
Yes, if you could add me to 368 and 619 with some of my colleagues, that'd be great.
Okay, 368, and what was the other one, 619?
368 and 619.
Okay. Okay, any others? Representative McKay?
619. You can go all the time.
Any others? Okay, now, where we have two former chairmen here, you can advise me. Is there a limit to how big a subcommittee can be?
No, and as you and I discussed earlier, subcommittees are supposed to be composed in the same makeup as the general makeup of the House, generally speaking. That's a protection for the minority, and I have seen in the past where sometimes by agreement, people have departed from that, and if everybody's in agreement with it, I'm not going to make any fuss about it, but as you recognize, there are certain ones that are political hot potatoes where it will be best if we stick to the
Sure.
letter of the rule.
All right. All right, we need to sift through here and
And if I may, I mean, there's no need for you to actually give us a final decision today.
okay. All right. All right, I appreciate that. Yeah, well, I'll sift through these, and again, Representative Weber, you suggested that we have 264, 368, and 619 as one subcommittee. Are there any other groupings here that anybody would recommend be another subcommittee? Representative Leon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd recommend the developmental disabilities bills, which are 317 and 608 to be together.
That was the other set that I was thinking about. Only I couldn't find the numbers, so thank you.
Okay.
Which two of those, please?
317 and 608.
And again, these would be as a formal subcommittee, right? Both of these.
Yes, I think that would be good.
Right, okay. Any other formal subcommittees that we need? The alternative being, of course, more of an informal discussion group. Representative Weber.
If you name a group, it becomes a subcommittee of this house. So we may decide that we don't want a formal subcommittee, in which case people are going to have to get together on their own. Otherwise, we're going to get
We do
into
know
right
who's
to know
interested in these
issues.
stuff, at least, so.
Right.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Representative Merchant.
I would like to be added to 608. That is something also being explored by the Oversight Committee of DHHS, which I'm
Right.
part of. Thank you.
Okay. Any others? Okay. Any other bills here that would lend themselves to any kind of formal subcommittee that you can see? Anybody thinks? Representative Leon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that the sexual assault one may make sense to have a subcommittee so that we can hear from those prosecuting attorneys and everybody else who has a stake into whether or not these people should be offered these kits.
Down about 378.
Yes, 378. And I think it's quite possible that the organ donation one as well makes sense, 587, since there's been some big changes with the UNOS system to get a better understanding of where New Hampshire moves as the national landscape is looking a bit different.
587.
587.
Again, you're recommending a formal subcommittee, right?
And just to make your life either easier or harder, as the case may be, I would recommend that we had formal subcommittees on all of this. You have people who have interests in all of the bills. And it really does, for some of them, it may only need one meeting. But I think it makes good sense when we have a lot of time and the ability to schedule meetings to have the formal subcommittee process. It's something that we did a lot more of in the pre-COVID days and have gotten away from. But I think it really comes out with a better result. And either it forges a consensus or it makes very clear what the competing interests are. And it makes it easier for the full committee to have, and then the House to have real confidence in the process, and that the people who wanted to be included as stakeholders have had their opportunity to be included as stakeholders, and you know, they may or may not choose to take up that offer, but I think it's a better process.
Okay.
So that's my suggestion.
Okay. So we have 14 bills, 3, 5, 6, 7 of them are addressed so far. As far as subcommittees, any other groupings that anyone would suggest that lend themselves to a formal subcommittee?
I think the others could have subcommittees but be standalones.
Is that unwieldy to have that many? Again, I'm just asking the question. I'm not challenging the idea. I'm just asking.
I think it depends on how willing people are to work on them. But as far as I can see, the work needs to get done, whether it's in a formal subcommittee or whether it's informally. And I think the work ought to be done formally, if at all possible.
Mr. Chairman, in my first 2 terms in this committee, that's what we did. And that doesn't mean this committee has to, it just means we found that useful.
Okay. All right. Again, it's something I'm not as familiar with. Representative Shapiro and then Representative Weber.
I'm just wondering about House Bill 566, which is relative to establishing fund for childcare and early childhood educators. And it seems to me like that might have been unusual that it came here as opposed to coming to education in the first place. And I'm wondering if we're going to continue with it and have a retained bill committee, is it possible to overlap with the education committee? Because it seems like if another bill was created out of this retained bill, that it would very likely go to the education committee and not to us,
Children and family.
or children and family.
Representative Pearson.
Or the special committee on this very subject chaired by Representative Ross Berry.
Right.
I'm about to get some advice on this matter.
I think we have.
Right, that's a better idea.
Once we've had hearings, we'll stop with it.
Well, yeah, but I mean, in terms of what the Department of Education deals with, they do not do early childhood, they don't.
Okay. Education does not deal with early childhood issues, so. Right.
Or special committee on childcare. Yeah.
You know, earlier in the process, Representative Weber and Representative Leon and I tried to parcel out some of these bills to other committees, and we were not successful. We were told careful consideration had been made in the assignments, and they were ours. And I can't remember if this was one of them or not, but
It was.
it was, okay. Representative Leon.
Thank you. Actually, in that vein, one of the bills that's been noticed on our calendar, 527, had been vacated to finance. So that's why it's not on our allocation list, if anybody has been comparing those two. So it's noticed for us here, but that's a finance bill.
Okay. All right, so I will, oh, yes,
Yes,
Representative Pearson.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, even if you can't get rid of the early childhood bill, you could certainly, as you know, bring in that subcommittee as consultants to update you as to their thinking.
Okay, yeah, that's true. Representative Weber?
We also have, in the somewhat more distant past, there was a tradition of when a bill was assigned to a particular committee, but it particularly pertained to two different committees. And I'm thinking of one that was administrative adjudications in the Department of Environmental Services. We have had a member of the other committee just sit in to advise. They don't get a vote, they're not an official member, but you would certainly be within your rights, I think, to ask if somebody from either of the other committees, and certainly there are people who are on both, might come and help aid with the deliberations.
Representative Pearson, are you on Representative Barry's committee?
As an adjunct member, yes.
Okay,
But we do have somebody who's on the committee as a regular full participant member who's also on children and family law.
is that Representative Nelson?
Don't ask.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I'm thinking Bill Nelson, yes. My
Representative Jody
external
Nelson, I think.
memory stick says you're right.
Okay, all right. Representative DeSimone's on both also? Okay. Okay, well, good to know. Representative Shapiro.
I don't know if there is a final disposition on this. It's an area that I have a lot of interest in, but I'm hesitant to participate in a subcommittee if it's really belongs someplace else and is going to be acted on someplace else.
Can't be acted on somewhere else because in this committee.
And we've already had hearings on it and everything else. Yeah.
Okay.
It's my understanding, once you start having hearings and taking it up in committee, you're stuck with it. That's why you know, again, a few of us tried to get rid of some of these things early on and we're not successful, so.
Okay, then I would express interest in that committee as well.
On 566?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yes, Representative Cannon. Okay. Okay. Any other thoughts or interests? And again, yeah, I will sort these through and come up with some suggestions and formal appointments of chairman and vice chairman of the subcommittees. And, you know, we can sift through that in the days to come. And again, we want to balance all of these out, and not only because we have to, but because, you know, we should, if we're going to come up with meaningful conclusions and recommendations for the full committee. Representative McLean.
That 566 looks light, so if it is gonna go forward, and I thought maybe it would with just Representative Cushman, but if it's now the complement's filling up, I'd like to be on that as well.
Okay, great.
Representative King also.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Representative King had mentioned earlier he'd like to be on it. Anyone else on this bill or any others? Okay. All right. Well, it's a work in progress, but thank you for all of the input. I appreciate that, and I'll get back to you at least via email, and then obviously we'll be meeting again anyway. Ms. Dyer has given us side-by-sides of Senate action on a couple of our bills. And the purpose here is Representative Weber had suggested, if I remember correctly, maybe a straw poll in terms of what we should do going forward in terms of concurring, non-concurring. Representative Shapiro.
Can I just go back to the previous
Oh, sure,
conversation?
sure.
Sorry. I would just, I don't know what other people's interest or lack of interest in this, but I was just thinking if, for those of us who live further away, if we could kind of overlap some of the scheduling of these subcommittees on some overlap on similar days. So those of us who are on 2, 3, 4 committees might be able to come to Concord once.
I mean, I'm going to defer to subcommittee membership and,
Okay.
and leadership in terms of when you want to meet, you know. and,
Okay.
You know, it's impossible for me to know exactly what's going to work out for all of you. So, you know, by all means, I'd encourage you all to work together and, you know, with your respective members to figure that out. But that makes absolute sense, because I know we like to think it's a small state, but sometimes it doesn't feel like it is, so. There you go, exactly, exactly. We don't want to overwork those kiosks in the lobby, you know? Okay, anything else on the retained bills? Okay, great, thank you. Again, getting back to the 2 Senate bills, a third one was just amended, fairly innocuous changes, but that one we don't have this morning. But House Bill 238 and House Bill 408, the changes are indicated here side by side. These have been previously sent out in an email, and just wanted to get reaction. Ultimately, we'll have to make a recommendation. I would imagine on June 8th, Ms. Dyer, we'd need to make a recommendation of concurring, non-concurring at that point to the full House. So, and at some point, I think we need to take a formal vote in this committee, but I don't believe we can do it this morning because it was not noticed as such, but Representative Weber.
We've never noticed these,
Oh, okay,
ever.
okay.
And I don't know what the rationale for that is. We do as a House often ignore the right to know law, but which is not a great way to do it, but.
Before we take a formal vote on these, we should notice them in the calendar, I would assume?
No, we've never noticed
Okay.
anything having to do with these, and various speakers have taken various positions from, on the one hand, you will have a meeting with your committee, even if it's, calling people up and getting a vote from each person, and follow that vote, to the chair will make the decision and won't talk to anybody on the committee about it at all. So I very much appreciate your including everybody. But they have often been very informal, gatherings under the clock in the hall or things like that. And I think maybe the rationale for it is that the bill is no longer in the hands of the committee. The bill is in the hands of the House. And we're not a quorum of the House. So in that respect, it may just fall completely outside the right to know law entirely.
Representative Leon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had actually inquired of the clerk as to that question, and yes, it's not a quorum because this is now in the hands of the full House. And while I think we're an important 20 members, we're only 20 of 400.
5%, right? Okay, well, any reactions to 238? Let's just take them in order. Any thoughts? Yes, Representative Shapiro.
If I'm understanding this correctly, and I would appreciate being corrected if I'm not, it seems to me that the Senate amendments, the parts that are amended do two things. One is that they remove
You're talking about 238 now, right?
238. So we had amended the part about contracting with contractors and made it a little bit, gave the Quality Council a little bit less power in that because we thought that was a conflict. But the Senate has taken that out completely, I believe. So that's one change. So that there's no mention of the Quality Control Council being involved in the contracting process at all. It doesn't mean they can't be, but it's not like required from this bill. So that's one thing. The other thing is that just in general, from some of the small changes, it seems to put more of the responsibility on the council making recommendations versus DHHS requesting recommendations. And for example, on page, there's no page numbers, but the 5th page, number 8 on the House version, it talks about the department reaching out to the Quality Council about the possibility of changes, and I believe that seems to be removed from the Senate version. So it kind of requires more initiative on the part of the Quality Council versus the department. So those are the two changes I see. I know some people who came to testify won't be happy with the part that removes the part about contracting. So I don't know what that means in terms of what I think. I still think it's still a good bill.
What's your thoughts? Concur, not concur? Committee of Conference?
I'm not really, I'm kind of up in the air about, I would hate to see the bill get killed in the long run, because I think it still has value, but maybe it could be better by sending it to a committee of conference. I would defer to other people's ideas before I make my decision.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I first ran for the House a number of years ago, the developmental disability issue was one I decided to work on a lot because of patients at my medical center, our DD folks, some of them. And then when I became chairman of DHHS Oversight 3 years ago, I would be present when the whole DD question would be coming up again and again. And while I believe the people at DHHS who work on this very issue are good people and motivated and so on, I believe the more encouragement from the Quality Council, the better for their doing their work. So just another way of saying, I'm sorry, the last part of this was left out by the Senate.
Other comments? Representative Leon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that when we look at this, we also need to understand that the world for the developmental disability community is in a lot of flux right now. They're changing some of the allowances on the federal level. We're changing the way we do things here. I think that even if in the future we were to back off of some of these requirements, I think that right now this more of a two-way conversation is important. So I think that we probably need further work on this to figure out where we can meet with the Senate to make sure that people are heard, but it's not too much of an onus. So I would go for a committee of conference.
Other comments? Representative McLean.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I basically agree with everything that's been said. I would vote to non-concur. I think none of these things that the Quality Council, none of these things is binding. But what it's doing is it's forcing the discussion, and there may be things that might slip past them or whatever in terms of contracts. So it's actively bringing them into the discussion. And as I said, none of it is binding. So absent some concrete understanding of why the Senate took it out, I can't believe it's because it's too burdensome would be enough. I think we should non-concur and have that discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other comments? Representative Weber.
I agree. I will make the comment that tactically, there's always a risk with a committee of conference. And I have in the past occasionally seen a really good bill vanish because somebody on one side or the other got cranky about it. What has traditionally happened in the House is when somebody has said, I'm not going to go along with what maybe the majority of the two different subcommittees wants. The House Speaker has been very active about removing that person and replacing them with somebody who is, shall we say, more amenable. I have also seen a time when one member from the Senate was put on a committee of conference for the sole purpose of not concurring and making sure that a bill died. And they were not replaced because that was their purpose altogether. I cannot think why that would happen with this bill, because we are very close, and it's a matter that I think all of us are very concerned about, and the question is just how best to address the issues. So I think there's less likelihood that that the wheels are going to come off, but I just want to make sure that those who have not lived with this process before know that there are all kinds of strange things that can happen in the committee of conference process. But that being said, I too think a committee of conference would be advisable on this one, because as we know, there's not only this bill, but there have been any number of other bills that have come before us about people who don't feel like they've been consulted properly. And I think that anytime we can encourage the people that our laws affect the lives of to have their input considered, we're more likely to make better decisions, for one thing. And if they disagree with the final decision, they will be more willing to accept it because they know that their voices have been heard and listened to, even if the answer is no.
Okay. Anyone who does not agree with the discussion, anybody who thinks that we should either non-concur period or concur? Everything seems to suggest that we want to non-concur and ask for a committee of conference. Is that pretty much the sentiment? Representative Shapiro.
I will agree with people who've expressed that view very eloquently.
Okay, great. All right, seeing no dissent on that, then that would be the recommendation I would make to the full House at the June 8th session. Moving on to House Bill 408. little more straightforward. Only one page at least. So, any comments about that?
Representative Copal.
Representative Gopal?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the Senate amendment was actually the product of a very collaborative process between myself, the policy director over the Senate, and Mr. Williams and Abby Rogers from DHHS. We came up with language that I think satisfied the concerns that DCYF had with regard to foster family homes and potential funding issues. We actually simplified the language, I think, with respect to the protections for children living in foster homes. And we added a provision that DHHS will submit a waiver request to the federal government to essentially to validate the assertion that children in foster homes will have the same rights to exemptions as anybody else in the state. So my request is that we do a simple concur with this and move this one forward.
That had been your bill originally, right?
Correct, yes, I'm the prime sponsor.
Okay. Any other discussion on 408? Thought is that we concur as it's been submitted here. Representative Weber?
I think the, the idea of a waiver of the federal mandate is a good one, and either we will get a waiver or we will not get a waiver. But in the absence of a waiver, it is possible, I think, that we would have problems. So I would agree with a motion to concur.
Other discussion on 408? Seeing none, we'll recommend to the House that we concur. Okay, unless yes, Representative Weber.
Would you care to let us know what the other one that's been amended that you've referred to, so
I
that we
believe it's
could
House Bill 611.
perhaps have a quick discussion on that as well?
Sure. It just happened last Thursday. I don't have we don't have the copy. I'm sorry?
Sorry.
Ms. Dyer, you don't have that, right? Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry?
I can print it out.
Oh, that'd be great if you could. Okay,
We've
great,
got some
thank you.
time. We might as well.
Sure. Alicia Preston actually called me about this yesterday, and I wasn't sure if we'd get to it this morning. But if, in the event we did, I did tell her I'd mention her comments. One of the things it does, from what, again, I don't have the in front of me, obviously, but
Could you tell us the bill number?
611. And it's one of my understanding, at least in part, perhaps completely, it basically substitutes one commission with another. It's about studying cannabis and its future. It's, I guess it's legalization in concert with a lot of the other discussions that have been held in recent days. Alicia Preston had called me because she represents clients who really understand growing it and the whole nature of the product. And this commission does not allow for anybody who actually has that insight and experience to be on the commission. And she said, if it's going to be a commission, there should be somebody who's familiar with growing it and using it. And for the most part, that's not the case. And again, we'll see that in a moment. So that was her main purpose in contacting me. And whenever we had this discussion, she asked that I bring it up. So anyway, it's about all I know at the moment. I'm afraid. Representative Weber.
So just as I'm looking at the analysis, the bill as we passed it simply removed the requirement that severe pain be resistant to other treatment options as a precursor to being able to use therapeutic therapeutic cannabis, and I haven't checked, but I assume those are relatively similar. The two other things it adds is it adds a commission to study state-controlled sales of cannabis. And it also prohibits the sale of hemp products containing certain amounts of THC. My understanding is that one of the issues with CBD products is that many of them are not monitored as carefully as they might be, so that people wind up ingesting more THC than they thought they were ingesting, and they have a right to know. But I haven't read through that second part, so I don't know exactly what the focus is. I wonder if, because we have a lot of moving parts with respect to therapeutic cannabis and who is going to be studying what, whether this is one that's either better held to the last date for forming committees of conference, or whether we ought to request a committee of conference solely to keep everybody's options open and communicate to the Senate that that's why we're doing it. But so that we can actually, I mean, we don't have to do anything right now, and I would vote for leaving it until we've had another chance to discuss. But I know that there are several bills to which study committees have either already been established or have been attached. So we might want to just put this on for committee of conference just so that we have a better idea which of the many options is going to be the best one.
So I just want to say, I didn't have a chance to go through the commission that they're adding. We just finished a very extensive, so there's been a lot of work done on it, and just recently. It's worth looking at, and I think Provision 3 was a bill that we heard that came through committee maybe last session. I just haven't had a chance to look into it, so I can certainly provide more information if you want, but this is what I have
That'd be great.
today.
Thank you. Okay, other discussion on this? Representative Leon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Looking at it briefly, looking at the amendments that the Senate put in, they leave the initial two sections that we had passed about allowing these patients to get the care they need. But they added essentially a commission to study what the governor had put forth as his solution after the Senate shot down the House-supported position on legalization. And that's a matter of whether or not that study would be a useful study or not. That's one question. And then the other is around these, basically what you go into a gas station, you see, and it says it has THC, even though it's not the regulated one. So it is rather complex. I think it's kind of a shame that all of this has been added on when all we're trying to do is get appropriate care to patients. And I think that there would have been a better avenue for them to address their concerns as opposed to putting it here. So I'm a little disappointed.
Representative Shapiro.
Yeah, piggybacking on Representative Leon, it seems a little bit odd that the underlying bill deals with therapeutic cannabis, and then they've added something to deal with adult use of cannabis, recreational use. And I don't really know, so it makes it sound like this will be the one vehicle to kind of study the issue when I know that it's been studied endlessly. And are there any other current commissions or study committees that this commission overlaps with? I don't really know the answer to that, but I don't know if anybody does.
And
That's what I'd be wondering.
Working on that right now, right, in terms of further research?
I believe that Representative, oh my gosh, he did not return.
Representative Egan?
No, since Abrami, excuse me. They just finished a commission on cannabis last year, and this would repeal the existing commission and restudy some of it. I also believe that there was a bill that came to the Health and Human Services last year, toward 2021, about the hemp provision, but I can look more into that.
That'd be great. Thank you. Representative Weber?
The more I listen to this, the more I think I would suggest that we just non-concur and ask for a committee of conference right up front so that we can discuss some of these issues. And we certainly will have some time to do the research on, it sounds to me very much like there may be an existing commission that can actually just take this over. But I would be loath to just concur without further discussion. And I also would be loath to just let the bill die because I think the two sections that we sent over were good and useful policy that we all agreed on. And I too am sorry that it has other stuff added onto it, but that's the hand we've been dealt. So I think that maybe going and talking to the Senate about it is probably the best way to deal with it.
Representative Palazzo?
I'm probably in minority, but I would recommend concurring with this version. It still helps the patients and does what we wanted to do, just add some studying of safety effects. So personally, I recommend concurring.
You recommend concurring? Representative Pearson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Correct me, but I thought we passed a bill that said if we're going to have a commission, 51% of the members have to be legislators. And I'd have to do 3 or 4 counts to see if that's true here. But having said that, I've never seen 5 senators show up for anything except, their meetings. But
they drafted it.
Denial is not just a river in Egypt. So I just wondered if this is actually correctly drawn up.
It's exactly even.
Exactly even? Okay, thank you. I withdraw that then. But still, the question of getting a quorum with so many senators being named is a bit problematic to me, having chaired these things and not seen senators show up.
Well,
Representative Weber?
the Senate is still only 25% of the commission. So even if all the senators don't show up, we have an opportunity for 4 other members also to be absent.
Representative Merchant?
But I'm not sure that the commission is worth doing, given the amount of time and energy that's been spent on this. And the fact that we had a bill last year that was quite similar to this. And at the time, the governor was not at all receptive, nor was the Senate. So one wonders why we bother to study them again and again and again.
Representative Merchant?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would say to non-concur, possibly a committee of conference. And my rationale is that this is really kind of not dealing with the logjam between the House and the Senate. I would much prefer to have a study committee comprised of people that are going to look at this and get some sort of concurrence between the House and the Senate on a version of a bill we all can live with and ultimately pass next year. Creating this commission in a lot of ways doesn't resolve that. And I'm really concerned that there are underlying issues that need to be addressed by the House and the Senate. And that seems to be where the logjam is. I would prefer to have a study committee comprised of both chambers in order to come up with something that both chambers can support.
Thank you. Representative Leon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That law that we passed limits the number of people on the commission to 15 with a majority of lawmakers, so those numbers would not work. I do like the idea that if we were going to have something to discuss this, we perhaps would, in committee of conference, look to a study committee with an appropriate makeup and invite the Attorney General and the Governor to come help with us as well and see where we can get agreement. But looking also to the larger picture, there actually is also a non-germane amendment that was heard yesterday in Commerce in order to try and circle the square on cannabis. So there may be a solution that may come through this year, or at least that gives us another jumping off point to move closer to that agreement. So I do like this idea of potentially having a position of a study committee so that we can actually find an answer, find a solution with this legislature, this governor, this attorney general, and finally get something done on this for the people in New Hampshire.
Representative McLean?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I agree with the non-concurrence. We sent over a clean bill, and I like the committee model. I mean, another thing about the commission, in many respects, the commission presupposes the outcome of being a state-controlled model, which may very well be the way to go. But if you're going to have a study commission, you know, I don't want to put the cart before the horse and say this is what the outcome is going to be. So for all those reasons, I think it's wise to not concur.
Okay. Other discussion? All right, I'm hearing the general consensus be non-concur and ask for a committee of conference. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Hand?
Representative Kofal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just a point of information, because there's been a couple of comments or questions about the composition of the committee. The language in the Senate version begins with the phrase, or section 2 of part 2 of section 3, notwithstanding RSA 1449. So this is something we're running up against in the Committee on Commissions, is this magic phrase, notwithstanding RSA 1449, essentially says, you know, the following is not going to conform to the statute as it is, and the statute regarding composition of commissions as it is. So just point of information.
Okay. Other discussion? Okay, and again, basically, what I'm hearing is non-concur with a committee of conference. Is other than Representative Palazov, does anyone else have a concern about that? Not that we don't appreciate your
I will join the majority.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, that'll be what I recommend to the House then. Representative Leon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had done a search to find, we actually have one other that's been returned. I don't know if we've officially received it yet, but House Bill 642 on the budget flexibility for development disabled. We're going to have to take more of a look at it, but I just wanted to let everybody know that that one's been returned with an amendment.
Yeah, I had not heard about that one.
I just searched it now.
Oh, okay. When did they amend it? Was it last week?
They amended it last week on the 11th.
Okay. Okay. All right, that's all I know about that. Anything else for the work session? Before, we've got a couple of minutes before we need to go into executive session. All right, let's recess for a couple of minutes and then we'll return. Thank you. I'd like to call us back to order. We are in executive session, a little bit late. I apologize for that. I'd like to open up the discussion on Senate Bill 240. And Representative Merchant, do you wish to make a motion?
I make a motion to pass Amendment 2023-1954H.
I'll second.
And Representative Leon seconds. Representative Merchant, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Chair. This bill came to us out of concern, a way that the data for genetic testing and so forth could be utilized for clinical care of the patient. If you look at the statute, the way it's written now, there is confusion. So to avoid the use of the data within the clinical care of the patient, this bill basically addresses that. Secondly, it also addresses the fact that there's specific consent by the patient to release it. We had one last hanging issue, which is dealing with the use of de-identified patient data for clinical research. A lot of it came down to is that many times we have information within the system, but the system does not have patient-specific information. If you de-identify it, it's hard to get the patient to find out who you have to get consent from. So instead of trying to tackle all three issues, consent, the use of the data for the patient care, the subcommittee elected to break it apart into two pieces. One is to take care of this one for this year, take care of the patient, which is what we're trying to get to, so the patient can be taken care of and the data can be shared amongst the members of the clinical team. Number two, the other issue about the data itself, de-identified and so forth, the recommendation by the subcommittee to this committee is to then get a group together maybe over the summer, ad hoc if you will, and come back with another bill next year to address that issue. So fundamentally, this bill does two things. One, identifies specifically patient consent, and it allows for, it clarifies, if you will, the use of the data amongst the clinical care team, so the data can be shared amongst providers of trying to care for the patient.
Thank you. Representative Shapiro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I may be really thick, but are we saying that there's a currently in statute, it says that someone who has genetic testing, that the information can't be shared with their medical providers, even if they give consent? I know that's not relevant to this amendment, because this amendment's trying to fix that, but is that the case?
Representative Weber.
It was certainly unclear enough. I mean, I don't think it is the case. I don't think it should be the case, but it was unclear enough that one of the things that we wanted to clarify with the amendment is that the patient can consent to whatever the patient wants to consent to. The issue came up with respect to, I mean, we've always enacted statutes to be very careful of people's genetic material and the people it's shared with. So there was concern that the statute as is now written, when you're looking for a clinical trial that might be effective for a particular patient, and there are gazillions of them, and there are clearinghouses, what the statute expressly permits is submitting genetic material for those studies. But it's ridiculous to you have the genetics analyzed once, you can send the data. It was not entirely clear that the data could be sent. And I think this just made all of us a little, on the subcommittee at least, a little more comfortable with making sure that patients can consent to whatever they want to consent to, but that their consent is required.
Thank you for that clarification.
Representative Merchant, then Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Where the confusion lies is in 141H2(3), and I'm going to paraphrase it. No person shall disclose to any other person that an individual has undergone genetic testing, and no person shall disclose results of such testing to any other person without written consent. And that's where it got into the gray area that Representative Weber is talking about. We heard from people, their concern was it wasn't clear enough for them to feel that they could actually share it amongst the clinical team that's taking care of the patient. So we wanted to clarify it.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate separating these two out, and I think that's the appropriate way to go. Certainly, the C refers to the clinical research, and you can understand why. I mean, the clinical care of the patient is different than the research arm that would use the data for other purposes, perhaps, and I think that's important to separate them out. Section B says that the analysis and the testing can be disclosed to entities that are caring for the patient. And I can understand that as well. You may do a procedure here, but they don't have the specific protocol in that institution, but they have to go somewhere else, so they have to share that data. So that's important to me as well. What I'm trying to, my question is, I guess, is, and again, I'm just trying to understand it because I understand getting parental consent, patient consent for, procedures, and what will happen when they have a procedure done as a surgeon. What I'm trying to understand is what is referred to as the consenting patient by a clinical laboratory. So if you can explain to me, I'm just trying to understand what is the definition of a consenting patient. Are they consenting for say a biopsy? Are they consenting for a buccal smear? Are they consenting for a laboratory study only? Or are they consenting to doing a procedure, taking a test, and then in that same consent, is that also implied that they can use that data for entities outside the provider where it was taken to help in the treatment of the patient? Is that it? I'm trying to...
Our intent was to allow for the broadest use once a patient has consented to broad use, to share it as widely as possible to enable trials to come up. We didn't want to be too specific about how that worked. In the discussions that we had, and I'll defer to the others if they feel differently because this is just my perception, but the sticking point for us was the addition of de-identified material being used for people doing retrospective studies to find out how effective a particular treatment had been. And the thing that we were grappling with and simply felt we had no time to do it successfully or thoughtfully is the more you de-identify data, the less useful it is in terms of pinpointing which members of a particular population may be the treatment may be more effective for. So, or pinpointing other issues that might affect the results. So we just didn't feel like we could deal with that. And that actually was a piece that was tacked onto the original bill, which was all about clinical treatment. So we did not grapple with the absolute specifics of stuff. What we were really focusing on was allowing a patient to consent to whatever a patient wanted to consent to, because like Representative Shapiro's first question, a lot of us sitting here were really startled to find out that a patient couldn't give effective consent, or that there was a concern about patients giving effective consent to certain things.
So can I follow? So if I can give a concrete example, and again, I agree with this, and I would like to have it go forward, and I'm just trying to understand consent. So for instance, if I had a consent for a procedure, it's listed what would happen, potentially anything from a great success to a death, and anything in between, and people that would participate in a procedure or not, that sort of thing, infection, et cetera, et cetera. So my question is, how do you protect or how do you assuage those concerned about having a broad stroke for consent when you deal with the genetic testing or analysis that says, okay, I'm trying to understand this. If I had somebody in my family had a BRCA gene, they said, I just want to know if I have that gene. But I don't want that shared for protection of my siblings and my children for insurance purposes or otherwise. How is that assured that that information is not, widely dispersed to the point where it could potentially harm or influence the care of a sibling or a family member?
Representative Lane.
I think Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you look at the larger part of the 141-H, which is about genetic testing, we're talking about just the conditions of genetic testing. Section 3 is the use of genetic testing in employment situations. Section 4 is in health insurance, and Section 5 is in life, disability income, and long-term care insurance. It prohibits that use for anybody so that we don't get that discrimination based upon your genetic testing. And part of this as well, you're talking about that overall consent. If you're coerced to do it, if the only way you can get the genetic testing is to share your data now and forever, that's not consent. That's acquiescence, and it's very different. There are some cancer centers where they pay for your genetic testing, and if you consent for them to pay for it, they're able to use your data in the ways that they spell out with the IRB. So they're doing a lot of great research there, but they're also fronting that money to pay for that genetic research. And with that exchange, it does make sense. So we were just trying to make sure that that genetic retrospective research, which is not clinical research because it's not based upon the specific patient, but is more population-based, that has appropriate treatment because the people who had come and testified wanted to be able to access this information as broadly as possible. Because the more data you use, the better your conclusions. But the medical records belong to the patient, not to the institution. And so that balance is going to take a lot more than we could do here. We had the pressing need that to match somebody to a clinical trial or find another provider that's offering, especially for a rare disease. You can't just go through the clinicaltrials.gov and try and search for those. It's just too cumbersome. So there's clearinghouses. And that is the biggest part about Section B, is to be able to disclose it for the entities participating in the clinical care, which are those clearinghouses that try and match these patients with those promising treatments, especially because we're seeing such a proliferation of treatments for these rare diseases, but nobody can stay on top of it. I mean, you have all the different institutions. You have for obstetrics and gynecologic cancers, you have ACOG, then you have others. So you need to be able to reach out into all of these, and we need computers. So, yes.
Representative Weber and then Representative McLean.
And to answer your specific question about limiting the uses, you can always limit the uses as well. I mean, you're going to have to read the form and say, well, gee, I don't want all of this. Or you're going to have to tell your care provider, look, I want to know this for myself. I want to be darn sure that my siblings, my offspring don't get this. And they're not allowed to share it anyway. I mean, that's just basic. You can't share it with anybody who isn't under the umbrella of what you've already consented to. So I think patients, or I mean, from the patient perspective and also from the perspective of somebody who sat here and listened to patients a lot, they come in two varieties. Some people go in and say, sure, I'll consent to whatever you think I need to consent to, give me the forms and take them away again. And then you have patients who are very, very careful and thorough about what they consent to because it's very important to them, and they won't sign blanket consents. They will put limits on them. But our whole focus in the approach that we adopted was to leave the control with the patient. I can't answer a for instance about they've done this and they've done this. I will say that we did have involved in the negotiations, there was a clinician who, from Dartmouth Medical, who vetted the language and helped us with the language. So there was a clinical perspective involved in the process.
Representative McLean and then Representative Merchant.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I sat in on one of the work sessions, just watched everybody, so I thought everybody did a really awesome job. The one question I have, kind of gets back to Representative Weber's comments about, blanket consent versus non-blanket consent, and the nature of the consenting patient. So we see gene testing, it's really evolving. So let's just say, for example, at some point in the future, I'll just kind of role play a little bit. If I had rheumatoid arthritis, so my treating physician in that case is working with me and maybe trying to develop treatments with me. So if at some point my treating physician decides I'd really like to have Mark go in and have genetic testing done because we have all these things with rheumatoid arthritis. And if I just really wasn't comfortable for whatever reason with that kind of testing, would this language as it's written allow me to say, no, that's something I don't want? Because it says on the C section, it says specific informed consent. So I'm just kind of wondering how that kind of would play out.
Representative Merchant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative McLean. Also in the statute, if you go back and look at section 2, there's a line in here, it says, no person shall refuse to perform genetic testing or to arrange for genetic testing to be performed or do business with an individual solely because the individual to be tested refuses to consent to provide the test results to any other person. So if you don't want those results to go anywhere else, you have that right. That's why if you look at the way it's written, it allows for it only when it's specified within the consent form. So the consent form is what's driving this. If the patient ultimately consents to it, whatever they consent to is what's allowed. If the patient does consent, it's not allowed.
Thank you very much.
Representative Kofal, did you have your hand up?
I did. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess I would just point out that genetic information by its very nature cannot be de-identified unless you start to break down a patient's gene sequence and only share parts of it. So there are privacy implications associated with sharing genetic data that perhaps don't apply to other forms of information. I guess in an ideal world, I would like to see a kind of consent reversal process similar to what Europe has instituted with GDPR. Having said that, I don't think we're going to solve that problem today. I'm in agreement with Representative Weber that there is a consent form. It is in the control of the patient. They have the responsibility to read that and the right to decide whether or not to share that information.
Representative Murphy.
Well, thank you. And I will vote in favor of this amendment because I believe in its intent. I have been involved in meta-analysis studies before. I appreciate the value and the power of data that is collected in large numbers. I was just trying to make sure that we all understand that the consent is patient-driven and not taken away from them in any shape or form in anything that's currently written in statute. So, thank you.
Thank you. Other discussion, Representative Weber.
That was very much what we were trying to restore.
Other discussion? Seeing none, I will ask the clerk to call the roll. The motion is ought to pass on Amendment 1954H.
Representative Leon,
Yes.
Representative Cushman,
Yes.
Representative Bill King, yes. Representative Kofal,
Yes.
Representative McLean,
Yes.
Representative Seth King,
Yes.
Representative Mazur,
Yes.
Representative Pearson,
Yes.
Representative Pelosi,
Yes.
Representative Weber,
Yes.
Representative McKay,
Yes.
Representative Freitas,
Yes.
Representative Cannon,
Yes.
Representative Lane,
Yes.
Representative Shapiro,
Yes.
Representative Merchant,
Yes.
Representative Murphy,
Yes.
Representative Lloyd, Representative Tellez,
Yes.
and Representative McDonald.
Yes.
Unanimous, 20-0.
Okay, very good. Do I have another motion? Does anyone want to move? Representative Merchant.
You also make a motion to ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 240.
Is there a second? Representative Murphy seconds. Any discussion on the motion? Representative Weber.
I think for my purposes, we've discussed it plenty, but I would request that the drafter of the report make it very clear in specific language that it is the intent of the bill is to ensure the maximum amount of control for a patient over their medical decisions. And, I can't draft it in my head like that, but if we have a statement about intent in the blurb, it will be helpful.
And thank you, Representative Weber. I would more than glad to share that with anyone else on the committee to help me draft it correctly, because
I'd be glad to consult.
Thank
so.
You're drafting it, the Representative Merchant, I assume?
I'll be drafting it, yes. And anyone else on the committee wishes to help, by all means, let me know. I'll send it off to you as well. And go forward. Question to the chair, when does this have to be in by?
Always, the sooner the better, but the House isn't meeting until June 8th, so it needs to be,
Do we have some time?
we've
Mr.
got some time, yeah.
Okay,
We're
thank
not meeting, the House is not meeting next week, so. Other discussion? Okay, the motion is ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 240. I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Representative Leon,
Yes.
Representative Cushman,
Yes.
Representative Bill King, yes. Representative Kofal,
Yes.
Representative McLean,
Yes.
Representative Seth King.
Yes.
Representative Mazur,
Yes.
Representative Pearson,
Yes.
Representative Pelosi,
Yes.
Representative Weber,
Yes.
Representative McKay,
Yes.
Representative Freitas,
Yes.
Representative Cannon,
Yes.
Representative Lane,
Yes.
Representative Shapiro,
Yes.
Representative Merchant,
Yes.
Representative Murphy,
Yes.
Representative Lloyd,
Yes.
Representative Tejas,
Yes.
and Representative McDonald,
Yes.
20-0.
Okay, if there's no objection, we'll put that on the consent calendar. Okay, that is the only bill we had for executive session. If it's in order, and I believe it is, we could revisit House Bill 238. Close out the executive session and return to House Bill 238. And we did have received some valuable information during the break. And I believe it would be in order to ask perhaps if they come forward and share that, Representative Weber?
Sure.
So would you like to come up and share what your insights on this are?
I did call the chair of the council.
Sure,
We can go one at a time.
sure. Feel free to grab another chair and please identify yourselves and make sure the microphone is on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Alex Katrubis. I'm a registered lobbyist for the area agencies, the 10 area agencies that provide and coordinate services for people with developmental disabilities.
Hi, good morning. I'm Stephanie Patrick, and I'm the chair of the Quality Council and also the executive director of Disability Rights Center.
Okay.
I just want to say on behalf of the area agencies, we feel that there was obviously a lot of discussion in this committee on this legislation. When it came over to the Senate, there was...
We're talking about House Bill 238.
Exactly. House Bill 238 relative to the Quality Council, Developmental Services Quality Council. You may recall at the hearing there was a lot of concern that families and advocates and providers didn't feel included in a lot of the decisions that were made by the department. And so this bill was clearly a result of that concern out in the community around the state. So Representative McMahon, who has long been a champion of developmental services in the state, brought forward this legislation, and the area agencies did support it. When it came over to the Senate, there was a lot of concern. Just for your information, this legislation did not go to the Health and Human Services Committee in the Senate. It actually went to the executive departments and administration, the ED&A committee, largely because of the contracting components that were in the legislation. And there was a lot of concern, particularly by some of the leadership on the committee, that because of the procurement rules and legal issues around fairness in terms of how state contracts are awarded, that they were not comfortable with a lot of the language that was in the bill. And you might recall that you actually scaled back some of that language as well in terms of how it was introduced. So we had an initial amendment that was presented, largely written by the department, and the area agencies and the DRC and other advocates did push back on that amendment, because I personally felt that it was sort of a toothless tiger. There was not not a lot of meaningful change that was part of that amendment. We went back to the drawing board, came up with, I think, a good amendment that requires at a minimum quarterly dialogue between the council and the department. The department has to respond in writing, and there's a lot of detailed information that they can't just respond with one sentence. It has to be in writing. There has to be detailed explanations about why they're making the decisions that they are. So I think that this bill, just to summarize, is going to improve communication between the developmental disability community, the providers, the families, and the advocates like the DRC. So I guess just to summarize, not to speak for others, but the department, the providers, and groups like the Disability Rights Center, which are advocacy organizations that don't provide services but represent individuals and families in the system to make sure that they're treated fairly and receive the services that they need. All of the groups were able to come together after a couple of additional amendments in the Senate to come to a conclusion that we were all able to support this bill. So I think it's probably 3/4 of a loaf, and we're just concerned that if you ask for a committee of conference, I don't know how much more the Senate would give on this. So it's probably best to take the 3/4 of the loaf and not risk this bill being defeated, or even the Senate maybe non-concurring, because I don't think there's going to be a lot of appetite to go back to the contracting issues. I think there are some concerns there. So we don't want to risk a lot of the good work that was done. So I'll turn it over to the DRC unless there's other questions.
Go ahead, and I'll ask you both at the same time if we have any questions. But
Thank you. Yep, so I just wanted to be clear, one of the things that this bill addresses is some problems the Quality Council has had with making sure that people with disabilities and family members can participate in the council. We faced that issue last week at the scheduled Quality Council meeting, so we were not able to hold an official meeting. So we did not take an official vote on a position on this bill, and so I can't speak for the Quality Council as a whole. As in terms of Disability Rights Center, I agree with Alex. I think that while there is still room to improve the process, this bill as it stands, as amended by the Senate, does put us in a much better place to be able to address the concerns the Quality Council had. I've talked to Representative McMahon, and he's very open to additional legislation if that's needed, if this process isn't working in a couple of years, or at least he was when I talked to him a couple of weeks ago. And so I agree. I think as Representative DRC, and a member of the Quality Council, I would say that this is a good compromise that addressed some of the concerns the department raised. And I am equally as concerned as Alex that we will run into problems getting it back through the Senate if it changes much.
okay, questions, Representative Shapiro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think both of you coming would kind of sway my vote on this, but I'll just ask, since so much of the discussion that happened in our initial hearing involved the consultants that were hired and did do a report, and that people in the disabilities community felt like they were not consulted and did not have a say in that. So what I'm hearing you say that there are other good things in this bill, and you're willing to let go of the involvement in the contracting process in the future.
I think so. I mean, I think that, the bill sets up a process so that we have quarterly dialogues with the department. And so I think if a contract that the department was considering or that they had implemented was part of the concerns of the Quality Council, there's no restriction on putting that into that letter and then invoking this process that's outlined to have conversations with it in that way, at least. I mean, I think, originally the council members really wanted to be more of a voice during that process. I think that would be ideal, but I do think that there would be a way to have those kinds of conversations either in writing or at Quality Council meetings, even about contracts. Just be a little bit different. It may be a little slower.
Thank you.
Representative Land.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to look at this. It seems like there are changes beyond just the contracting. So there are other changes that are happening. I guess I frankly would be disappointed if there were concerns about places beyond the contracting, and the Senate wouldn't come to the table if we were willing to budge on the contracting issue, but still had other concerns for these differences. So is that something where the other changes have been meaningful, or is those ones that you're just willing to accede to? I guess you're willing to accede to all of it, so I guess that's not a question.
I mean, I think that the process is much more detailed than it was in terms of feedback from the council. You know, now there's a limit of quarterly to invoke this process that you can see outlined in the Senate version of the bill. In terms of, you know, we didn't outline it, just that if the council sends a letter to the department with concerns, the department has to respond in writing within 30 days. And now there's a process of coming to a meeting and having a discussion. I think we'll have to see if that is better. It's definitely more detailed than it was in the House version. You know, I think that generally conversations are more productive sometimes than letters back and forth to really make sure that the concerns are being addressed. We've seen that I've seen that in the Quality Council's comments on rules. Now that we have a member of the department who sits in on the Rules Committee meetings where we go over the kind of detailed concerns about that, I think it's made the department's understanding of the Quality Council's concerns richer. You know, like I said, I mean, if we're running up against a limit and frustrations that once a quarter is not sufficient, I think we could revisit that in the future. I mean, last year we sent them four formal letters with concerns. So if following that track, I think we would be okay.
Representative McKay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you believe that after the last discussion on this legislation, I was very disturbed by a long-standing concern about protecting the DD population. So I went ahead and formulated a request to the Oversight Committee of Health and Human Services, who's our former chair and present chair of the Oversight Committee, has that application. I'm convinced, because I know you people very well, that you're content with what has resulted. So I don't think we need to proceed with the Oversight Committee, but that opportunity is there. And it's a opportunity, I think, that works extremely well. The chairman actually has chaired two of those subcommittees himself. So that opportunity is there, but I would consider that we are now withdrawing that request.
Thank you.
Representative Weber.
Here's one of the things that's my concern. In Roman numeral 4, I was looking at the language. You said, you know, that we're going to meet quarterly. But the language actually says, and now I've lost it again. It says no more frequently than quarterly. So the concern that raises for me, I thought when you were outlining it that we were talking about at a minimum quarterly, as opposed to no more frequently than quarterly. My concern with this language, and you know, we can certainly, I'm perfectly willing to let go of the contracting stuff. I understand what the problems are with that. But if you agree to saying you're going to raise your concerns no more frequently than quarterly, if you've just had your quarterly meeting and something comes up the next week that is terribly concerning to the community, you have foreclosed any opportunity to do anything about it for another 3 months. So that is of real concern to me, and I see that Mr. Williams is making faces in the back there, so perhaps he disagrees with me, but there's only one way I can read the words no more frequently than quarterly. It means no more frequently than quarterly, and that is of concern to me, and I wonder if it's of concern to you as well.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No more frequently than quarterly officially But I do think the department knows from all of the activity we've been doing that we want to keep ongoing conversations. And I think nothing here would preclude an informal chit chat. Certainly nothing would preclude us coming back with more next year if that was necessary, or nothing would preclude us firing up the subcommittee Representative McKay had brought at one point. I don't think that no more than quarterly shuts off all discussion back and forth.
Could I make a couple
Sure, go ahead.
So right now, they don't have to respond. The quarterly limit is really about their responding to what the quality council is asking or raising as a concern. Right now, they don't have to respond at all.
Right, but
Nothing that requires, so at least this gives us quarterly, meaty, I call it meaty or meaningful feedback from the department that they can't just ignore and say that they didn't get the letter. Not that that's really happening, but I've heard that it could be happening, that they don't feel that they're getting a meaningful dialogue. So this requires quarterly feedback and meaningful dialogue. And in addition to that, the bill as amended by the Senate, if you look at Roman 5, there are exceptions for administrative rules, regulations, proposals, or other initiatives impacting quality. So those issues would not be subject to the quarterly limit. And that was put in as a request of Stephanie Patrick in the Senate. And that was actually the quote third amendment in committee that they considered, because exactly the point that you're raising, Representative Weber. So I think, I don't want to speak for Stephanie, but I think that gives her a little more comfort that many of the issues that are talked about on a regular basis will not be subject to the quarterly limitation.
And I didn't see that because, so I would, that gives me a certain amount more comfort. My concern was when you say no more frequently than quarterly, I am in entirely agreement with Representative Pearson about the informal communications. But first of all, informal communications certainly didn't seem to work before. And while we have earnest representations from the department that they want to do better, changes could happen in the department. So I like having it in statute. Pointing out the provisions in Roman 5 make me feel considerably more comfortable with the quarterly restriction. So I guess I've been talked around to being willing, if it's the will of the committee, to change my position on requesting a committee of conference.
Representative Leon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my question is if the council comments on those changes in rules, regulations, proposals, or other initiatives, is the department, would the department have a written response? Is there any request that the department would respond with a written response, or perhaps would that be that last inch that we need to reach agreement? Because it doesn't seem to me that they can comment, but there doesn't need to be a response. I guess I'm curious if there's any follow-up there.
I mean, they do have, as Stephanie said, they do have a representative on the council. So hopefully there would be dialogue there. And, as Representative Weber said, the intention is that they, hopefully through this process, they've come to the understanding that, there was a problem here and that they will be more responsive. But you're right, Representative, I guess you're right. The way I read it, there's no necessarily requirement that they provide a formal written response under Roman 5, the same way that they would have to under the quarterly requirement.
I guess as a follow-up to that, I'll back off on most of it, but I still would want to see a committee of conference, even if it's just adding that line to and request a written response and backing off on a lot of the rest of it.
Representative Tellez.
Hi, thank you. I just have a wondering, because to me, no more than quarterly means never, once a year. Like, where is there a minimum or a specified required frequency of a meeting?
I don't think there is a minimum. I mean, I think that would be at the will of the council. The council, that would give the council the ability to invoke this process as it's outlined, as it sees fit, which I think is what we thought that was the intention. So the council would send, in my understanding of the process, the council would discuss an issue at a meeting and develop a letter that reflects the council's concerns on whatever it is. It could be, we do this once a quarter and we capture everything that we've been worried about over that quarter, or well, the council will have to decide how it would manage that. We'd send the letter, we would make it clear that we're invoking the process that's outlined in section 4, and then we would invoke it then. I mean, there may be times when the council does not feel the need to invoke the formal process because the conversations have been productive enough. I wouldn't want to require us to do that or require the department to do that if it wasn't needed.
Other discussion?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Representative Merchant.
Thank you. I want to follow up on two of the comments. One is in regards to the frequency in which things are meeting, if you will. I understand the issue seems to be communication between the agencies and the department, but who is calling these meetings? Is it the department or the agencies themselves? Because I'm concerned about if the department's calling it and they only have to do it no more than quarterly, they could do it 6 months. There's nothing in here, zero, which following up exactly to your point. And then number two, I do have a concern if you go back and look on page 4, it goes back to the frequency of the meetings. If you submit something as a recommendation and then the department sends back a response saying, well, geez, we didn't have time to get to it for all these reasons, and you're meeting every quarterly, that's a 6-month time frame. So if we're really trying to act on things as recommendations from the council, where is there anything in the statute that requires A, the frequency of the meetings, and B, that there's some action taken at some point in time and actually keep kicking the can down the road?
So as exists in another part of the legislation, the changes that you saw, the chair of the council, the vice chair, the commissioner or his or her designee can call meetings of the council. We traditionally meet monthly, although we occasionally can meet on an emergency basis in addition to that, but we have a standing monthly meeting. It's down at the bottom.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As some of you know, I've been behind the scenes on this for quite a while. And let me just say, I am very encouraged by the department's response. We're not at the finish line yet, but not only are we not where we were, we're moving in the right direction. And I don't see the department being indifferent or hostile. And if they are, we can always have another bill or we can crank up a subcommittee. I'd take the win and I'd give them a compliment.
Representative Merchant.
Sort of digressing for a second, but we also have a retained bill 608, which deals with a pilot. Is that an opportunity for us to dive deeper into the contracting side of the equation during that subcommittee and that retained bill, so we can break them apart? One's dealing with communication, one's dealing with contracting. We can get the communication part that's going forward, but still have a way in a vehicle to talk about the contracting side.
Yeah, of course.
You can take my seat.
Oh, no.
We need a bigger table.
We do.
Sure.
Are a smaller legislative director. So there is already in existence a state procurement committee, and I would suggest that if you are studying the issue of procurement, it should go through that already established committee. I do understand also that House Bill 608 was retained specifically for the purpose as a vehicle for additional legislation, be it whatever it might be. Also, the department has honored, although not part of a legislative proposal, a monthly or on every single regular meeting of the HHS oversight to providing an update to that committee.
Representative Weber.
I just note that if we were going to draft that kind of an amendment to 608, it would need to be the subject of a non-germane amendment hearing, because it's not close enough to the original intent there, but we've got plenty of time to do that if we needed to do it. So.
Other questions for these folks? Okay, I guess we're all set. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the information. All right, having heard all of that, is it still opposition then to non-concur, or what would we like to do? I've heard generally still non-concur. Representative Weber?
I, having heard that, am willing to back off on non-concur and request a committee of conference, but I would love to hear how other committee members feel about it, because I can certainly see reasons for going either way, and I do concur with Representative Leon's concerns. So I think the question is whether we proceed with the half a loaf or 3/4 of a loaf, and then perhaps do some more work, get this part. What I see as helpful is maybe getting this part into statute and then taking advantage of retained Bill 608. If we need to make further changes, those changes will be acted on in January and go over to the Senate. And, you know, there will be a whole nother round of negotiations or non-negotiations, but at least we would have this much in the statute, and that would be, I think, a step in the right direction.
Representative Shapiro?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While I understand and agree with some of the lack of clarity about the number of meetings and those kinds of things, and concerned about taking the contracting part out, I think the intent of the people who brought this legislation was to give the disabilities community a bigger voice. And I think, you know, certainly there were only 2 people here sitting at the table, so they don't represent everybody in the disabilities community, but they came and they used their voice to say, we don't want to lose this. So I would tend to go along with their request that we concur on this. So that would be my vote.
Thank you. Representative Merchant?
I concur with Representative Shapiro, Representative Weber. It's better probably to have a partial loaf than no loaf. This does start the process of communication between the 2 entities. And given the fact that retained Bill 608 is probably not going to work its way through the calendar until sometime in March of next year, we'll have time to see how this actually works. If we're sensing or hearing that the communication process, which is this is designed to do, is in fact not working the way we think it should work, we could always address it and try to look at it from House Bill 608 and try to refine it at that point in time. So that's my take on it, would be to concur, take what we have, get the process started, see how it works, and we still have time if we need to react to it.
Thank you. Representative McKay?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree at this point to concur. I do it with some trepidation based on years of difficulty. I'm more comfortable with proceeding since at least I put a document in that will work. If we don't get the results that we see, the fact that I withdrew it doesn't mean that it's withdrawn from potential use. The chairman and I have talked about this.
I did not accept your withdrawal.
Yeah. And so that I agree with that, with the understanding that if we continue to have difficulties of communication, that there is an opportunity to resolve that right now.
Thank you. Representative Palazzo?
I agree with concerns around contracting, but I think we want this bill, Senate wants this bill. I don't see a risk in negotiating, especially that we are ready for some reasonable Senate amendments. So I want to stick with our previous decision for Committee of Conference.
Thank you. Representative Murphy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would agree with the concerns of, and the trepidations that Representative McKay and Leon have about, the timing and the structure, et cetera. But on the other hand, when I have the people that are most directly impacted by the legislation accepting 3/4 of a loaf, understanding that we have safeguards in place, whether it be 608 or Representative McKay's, ability to communicate with the Oversight Committee, I hate to, in regards to Representative Weber's concern about getting to committee of conference and having somehow this be sabotaged beyond the intent of this committee, I would frankly go along with concurrence and with the appropriate safeguards in place, feel very comfortable in doing that without going to committee of conference. Thank you.
Other thoughts? Representative Kofal.
Yes, I think we've heard from the very people affected by this that they would be happy if we concur. I think we should not, this is one of those cases where we should not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So I think a simple concur is in order.
Thank you. Other thoughts? Representative Leon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It seems that the overwhelming viewpoint is to do this. I guess the one ask I would have would be that perhaps I can speak to those on the other side, see if they would agree about the idea of the request for a written response. If there is full support of that last little closing the gap, fantastic. If not, I'm good with concurring. So I don't know if I can have a little bit of time just to see if they'd agree to request that written response, or if that would then lose the support of this committee.
Representative Weber.
I'd be glad to co-sponsor a bill to that effect next time around.
I appreciate that support. My biggest concern is just how many changes are going on. So I guess I'll stay quiet for now. We'll work towards that bill next year, and I'll let you know if I hear anything.
Okay, any other thoughts, any other discussion? Oh, okay. Well, I mean, again, what I'm primarily hearing too is to concur and forget about the committee of conference. Representative Leon, if you get new information, I'm certainly happy to consider it, but that would be the recommendation. It seems like we're headed in right now. So, and again, the House will not be meeting until June 8th, so we do have some time to find out. Okay, I know of no other business to come before us this morning or today. It's afternoon now. So I will adjourn, and given what we have pending, we will adjourn at the call of the chair.